adjusted the final floral arrangement of fresh garden roses and looked out over our garden. 80 white folding chairs shone under the soft rays of the afternoon English sun, waiting for the guests. My name is Margaret. I am 68 years old, and I was once the owner of the Golden Time, the finest catering agency in our county. My son Julian doesn't even suspect that respect, much like a good roast beef, is prepared over a slow fire. But today he is about to taste a dish whose flavor he will never forget. Everything was perfect, exactly as I had planned for months. The aroma of my signature shepherd's pie with secret spices had already begun to drift from the kitchen to the patio, mingling with the sweet scent of jasmine climbing the brick walls of our old house in the Cotswolds. I had spent 3 full days on my feet, choosing the best farm-sourced mince, simmering vegetables, and ensuring the mashed potatoes were so delicate they would melt in the mouth. This wasn't just another order. It was the graduation party of my granddaughter Sophie, my only granddaughter. The light of my life. She had just received her architecture degree in Bath. I had volunteered to organize this celebration myself. Not to save them money, but because I wanted to give my girl something made with love, something with roots, something that no modern London event company could ever replicate. I smoothed my best embroidered linen apron, which I wear only for special occasions, and checked my watch. It was 10 to 6 in the evening. Guests were expected by 6:30. Everything was calculated with the fastidious precision that had been my trademark for 40 years. In our area, there wasn't a single decent wedding or christening where my hors d'oeuvres weren't served. People used to say that Mrs. Margaret's food could reconcile old enemies and soften the crankiest of mothers-in-law. Now, though I had retired, my hands had not forgotten the rhythm of the kitchen or the art of hospitality. Suddenly, I heard a car brake sharply at the wrought iron gates. I smiled, thinking it was Julian and his wife Clara arriving early to help with the final touches, or to bring Sophie before the whole family gathered. I wiped my hands and walked toward the entrance, feeling that quiet motherly pride of being able to delight her loved ones. But when Julian stepped out of his gleaming Range Rover, I saw no joy on his face. He was alone. Frowning, he walked briskly, buried in his iPhone as if solving a world crisis, not even looking up to admire how I had transformed his childhood garden into an exquisite open-air hall. "Hello, dear," I said, opening my arms. "You're just in time. I need you to taste the sauce before." Julian stopped abruptly, dodging my embrace as if in a hurry to shake a heavy burden from his shoulders. He glanced at the set tables, the perfectly arranged chairs, and the strings of lights waiting to be lit at dusk, and let out a heavy sigh of irritation. "Mum, we need to talk, and quickly. I don't have much time," he snapped, without taking off his sunglasses. I felt a sudden chill in my stomach. That very chill that warns of bad news, even when the sun continues to warm the garden stones. "What's happened, son? Is something wrong with Sophie?" I asked, pressing my hand to my chest. No, Sophie is fine. She's at the salon with Clara," he replied, waving his hand dismissively. "It's about the party. Look, Mum, we've thought it over and decided to move the celebration to another venue." I froze. The sound of the birds in the trees seemed to go silent for a second. "What do you mean, another venue?" I whispered, gesturing toward the tables. "Julian, the guests will be here in 40 minutes. The food is ready. The pie, the snacks, those honey tartlets Sophie loves so much. Everything is here." Julian took off his glasses and looked at me with that expression of condescension he had acquired since becoming a regional director at his investment firm. That look that says, "Poor old woman, she really doesn't understand how the modern world works." "Oh, Mum, please." Clara confirmed a booking at the Sky Garden Lounge in the new city center at the last minute. It's a minimalist place with a panoramic view, air conditioning, sushi canapes, and all that. It's prestigious now. Sophie is an architect now. She needs to make connections at the right level, not have a village get-together in her grandmother's garden. The word village flew from his mouth like an insult. As if my home, which I had built brick by brick with the earnings from my honest work at the stove, was something shameful. "But son," I tried to speak firmly, though I felt my knees trembling. "Yves already invited your uncles, our neighbors who saw Sophie grow up. They are on their way here." We've already sent a WhatsApp message to everyone with the new location, he interrupted, checking his watch again. Most have confirmed. It's better this way, Mum. They have valet parking there, and it doesn't smell of, well, home cooking. I looked at the open kitchen door. The steam from the hot food continued to rise, carrying the legacy of my mother and grandmother. Home cooking. That was what he called the thing that had paid for his private school, bought his first car, and provided the privileged life he now enjoyed. And what am I to do with all this? I asked, pointing to the food for 80 people. What am I to do with these empty chairs, Julian? He shrugged, already turning back toward the car. I don't know, Mum. Freeze it or throw it away. It doesn't matter. The main thing is for Sophie to have a celebration of a proper standard. Clara says this rustic atmosphere doesn't fit the image we want to project. He stopped at the gate and threw out a final phrase that pierced my heart like a splinter. We don't need your help with logistics anymore, Mum. Take a rest, you're getting too old for this kind of pressure. If you want to come to the lounge, we'll be waiting for you, but do change. You smell of onions. And just like that, without another word, he got into his SUV and drove away, leaving me alone in the middle of my decorated garden. I stood there, watching the cloud of dust settle, as my son's Range Rover vanished around the corner of our lane. The silence that returned to my garden was different now. It was heavy, clinical, and sharp. 80 empty white chairs stared back at me like silent witnesses to my humiliation. We don't need you anymore. You smell like onions. I walked slowly to one of the tables and sat down, my hand tracing the edge of the crisp white linen tablecloth, starched and pressed exactly as my mother had taught me. My hands, lined with wrinkles and small scars from 40 years of kitchen work, were trembling slightly. Not from sadness, no. At first, I thought I would break down right there, over the fine-bone china plates, but what I felt wasn't a desire to cry. It was a fire, a heat different from the glow of my professional ovens. It was a mixture of indignation and sudden, piercing clarity. For years, I had allowed Julian and Clara to treat me like an outdated accessory, useful only when they needed a babysitter or a quick loan for some guaranteed investment. I had made myself small so they could feel large. I had accepted their dismissiveness, telling myself that's just how the younger generation is these days. But this was a betrayal of my craft, my history, and my dignity. In my world, to waste food is a sin, but to despise the hands that prepared it with love is an unforgivable treachery. I stood up and walked back to the kitchen. I lifted the lid of the largest cast-iron pot. The shepherd's pie was perfect, the potato topping peaked and golden, the rich gravy bubbling at the edges. It was a feast fit for royalty. Throw it away? Freeze it for leftovers? I said aloud to the empty garden. Not a chance, Julian. My voice sounded steady, echoing against the stone walls. They thought that because I was nearing 70, my world ended at the boundaries of this cottage. They thought my only purpose was to wait for their scraps of attention. They didn't know that Margaret of the Golden Time still had her old contact book, still had her reputation, and above all, still had a heart that knew the true value of things. I went inside and found my old address book, the worn leather one where I kept the personal numbers of my oldest clients and friends. I flicked to S. There it was, St. Jude's Community Center. And right below it, the mobile number for Arthur, the director of a local shelter for the homeless and displaced, located just past the railway tracks in a part of town Julian wouldn't dream of visiting for fear of scuffing his Italian loafers. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a tired, gravelly voice answered. Hello. Arthur, it's Margaret. Margaret from the catering. There was a brief pause, then his voice brightened instantly. Margaret. Good heavens, what a surprise. Is everything all right? Do you need a hand with something at the house? No, Arthur, quite the opposite. I have a problem, but I think it might be a blessing in disguise for your people. I have a full dinner for 80 people ready right now. And it's not just any food, Arthur. It's my signature shepherd's pie, roasted root vegetables with honey and thyme, fresh sourdough, and a triple-layer Victoria sponge. I have tables set, fairy lights on, and flowers everywhere. I heard Arthur catch his breath. I knew the shelter struggled for every penny, often stretching a thin soup to feed 50 mouths. Margaret, are you serious? When would this be? Right now, Arthur. The party is already set up in my garden. Get the shelter's van. Bring the families, the elderly gents who are on their own, the young people who haven't had a hot meal in weeks. Bring them all. I have 80 seats, and if more come, we'll pull the stools out of the kitchen. But Margaret, your party? Didn't you have a family celebration tonight? I looked out at the empty chairs and then toward the gate where my son had displayed his arrogance. My commitment was cancelled because home cooking wasn't good enough for them, I said, feeling every word return a bit of the strength Julian had tried to take. But I won't let this go to waste. I want them to come. I want them to eat like kings, and tell them to wear the best they have, because I'm going to receive them as if they were the Lord Lieutenant himself. Margaret, I don't know what to say. God bless you. We'll be there in 30 minutes. It might take 2 trips, but we're coming. I hung up. My hands weren't shaking anymore. A strange calm took hold of me. The calm of a general changing strategy in the middle of a battle. I went to my bedroom, took off my apron, and looked in the mirror. I saw the wrinkles, yes, but I also saw the eyes of a woman who had built a business from nothing, who had fed thousands, and who had raised a son alone since being widowed at 30. Julian told me to change because I smelled of onions. I opened my wardrobe and pulled out my best dress. Not the one I planned to wear while humbly serving them, but a royal blue silk number ID saved for a truly special occasion. I put on my pearl earrings, swiped on a discreet red lipstick, and brushed out my hair with pride. I spritzed my favorite gardenia perfume. I walked back into the garden. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the Cotswold sky in shades of orange and violet. I flicked the switch for the fairy lights. The place looked magical. 20 minutes later, I heard the sound of an old wheezing engine. It wasn't my son's luxury SUV, it was the shelter's battered white van. Behind it came a small caravan of people on foot. I saw women with children, men in worn but clean coats, elderly people leaning on walking sticks. I threw the gates wide open. Welcome, I shouted, a smile blooming from the depths of my soul. Please come in. The house is yours. Seeing their faces is something I will never forget. They entered shyly, looking at the lights, the flowers, and the tables set with such elegance as if they were afraid of breaking something just by looking at it. An older gentleman took off his flat cap and pressed it to his chest, his eyes welling up as he caught the scent of the hot food. Sit wherever you like, I told them, guiding them to the chairs. Tonight, you are all guests of honor. Arthur hopped out of the van and gave me a hug that nearly cracked my ribs. You have no idea what this means, Margaret. It's little Rosie's birthday today. That girl over there, he pointed to a 7-year-old in a mended dress. Her mum was crying earlier because she couldn't even afford a birthday cake. Well, today Rosie gets a 3-layer Victoria sponge, I said, feeling a lump in my throat. And a proper one at that. The music began. A playlist of classic English folk and light jazz. I started to serve. I didn't let anyone help me, I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to see their eyes when I handed them a plate piled high with steaming food. I wanted to hear them. Thank you, ma'am. God bless you, Margaret. Eve never tasted anything like this. The garden filled with laughter, the clatter of cutlery and life. There were no poses. No one was checking their phone to see if the venue was Instagrammable. There was hunger, yes, but also a genuine gratitude that filled the void my son had left with his contempt. As I was handing out warm rolls, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Julian, likely a photo of the Skyline Lounge with its tiny, cold canapes. I didn't check it. I didn't care. But what I didn't know, and what Julian couldn't have imagined, was that among the guests Arthur brought, there was someone who didn't quite fit the usual profile of the shelter. A quiet man with a silver beard and gray, piercing eyes, who ate with impeccable manners and observed every detail of my garden and my food with almost clinical attention. I approached his table to offer more water. Is everything to your liking, sir? I asked. He looked up at me, his gaze intelligent and sharp. He wiped his mouth with the linen napkin and nodded slowly. Mrs. Margaret, he said in a deep, resonant voice. Did you prepare this meal yourself? I did. It's an old family recipe. It is extraordinary, he said, never taking his eyes off me. I have been looking for this level of authenticity for years. My name is Lawrence. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too busy being happy watching the children play on the lawn. Night fell, and the party was at its peak. I sat in a corner with a glass of wine, surveying my masterpiece. I had turned a disaster into a miracle. My son had told me, "We don't need you," but these 80 people told me with every bite that I was indispensable. Suddenly, I saw familiar headlights approaching the gate. It was Julian's car. He was back. Probably forgotten something or coming to lecture me for not showing up at his modern party. I stood up slowly, smoothed my silk dress, and walked toward the entrance. Behind me, people were laughing and eating. In front of me, my son was stepping out of his car, and his face upon seeing my garden full of strangers, seeing the overflowing joy in the place he had despised, was a picture. But he had no idea that the real surprise wasn't the crowd in the garden. It was who was sitting at the head table, savoring my shepherd's pie as if it were liquid gold. Julian was about to learn that you should never underestimate a mother, who is also a master of her craft. Julian stepped out of the car, his face contorted in a mask of pure bewilderment. He looked at the crowds of people in his childhood garden, at the mismatched coats, the laughing children, and then at me, standing there in my royal blue silk and pearls. "Mother? What on earth is going on?" He stammered, his voice hushed but sharp. "Who are these? These people? And where is our food?" I came back because Clara realized she left her designer clutch in the hallway. "But this looks like a soup kitchen." I didn't flinch. I took a slow sip of my wine and looked him straight in the eye. "It's not like a soup kitchen, Julian. It is a banquet. And these people are my guests. Since you didn't need my help and found my cooking too rustic for your new friends, I decided to share the feast with those who actually appreciate the value of a hand-prepared meal." Julian opened his mouth to retort, but before he could utter another condescending word, the silver-bearded man, Lawrence, stood up from the head table and walked toward us. Julian's face went from pale to ghostly white in a fraction of a second. His jaw literally dropped. "Sir Lawrence?" Julian gasped, his voice cracking. "Sir Lawrence Sterling? What are you doing here? I thought you were in Dubai for the charity gala." The man I had served shepherd's pie to just minutes ago smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile for Julian. It was the smile of a man who had just seen behind a very thin curtain. "I decided to skip the gala, Julian," Sir Lawrence said, his voice like velvet over gravel. "I found the atmosphere there a bit manufactured. I was out for a walk near the shelter I sponsor when Arthur told me about a legendary chef hosting a dinner. I haven't tasted food like this since my grandmother's estate in Scotland 40 years ago." He turned to me and bowed his head slightly. "Margaret, your son has been trying to get a meeting with my investment firm for 6 months. He told me his family came from old money and refined traditions. He didn't mention that the tradition was the finest culinary talent in the Cotswolds, or that he treated that talent with such appalling disrespect." Julian was trembling now. "Sir Lawrence, I can explain. It was a misunderstanding. We just thought my mother needed a rest." "Enough, Julian," Sir Lawrence cut him off. "You've seen enough of your logistics tonight. A man who devalues the foundations of his own home is not a man I trust with my capital." He turned back to me, his expression softening. "Margaret, my firm is looking to back a new community-based hospitality project. Real food, real training for the local youth, the kind of home cooking that builds souls. I think we should talk properly." I looked at my son, who looked smaller than he ever had. The Skyline Lounge and its sushi canopy prestige had just cost him the biggest deal of his career, all because he was ashamed of the scent of onions. "I believe you have a clutch to find, Julian," I said quietly. "The guests and I would like to finish our dessert in peace." Julian turned and fled into the house, unable to look either of us in the eye. The rest of the evening was a triumph. We ate the Victoria sponge under the stars. I watched little Rosie blow out a single candle while 80 people sang happy birthday with a roar that must have been heard in the next village. When the last guest had left and the garden was quiet again, I sat on my porch. My feet ached, but my heart was full. I realized that at 68, when the world, and my own son, tried to tell me I was past my prime, I had actually just found my true calling. It wasn't just about catering, it was about nourishing. The next morning, Julian didn't come to argue. He came to apologize, truly apologize, sitting at my kitchen table with his head in his hands. He told me the project for the new public square in town was struggling because the local market traders refused to move. "They won't talk to me, Mum," he whispered. "They say I'm just another suit." I laughed, patting his hand. "Oh my boy. Those market ladies are the toughest negotiators in England. You'll sweat more trying to convince them than you would hauling bags of cement. But don't worry. I'll teach you. After all, I've been buying my onions from them for 40 years. We walked out into the garden together. The chairs were being folded, and the sun was rising over the hills. I didn't have millions in the bank, and I didn't need them. I had my hands, my recipes, and the absolute certainty that from now on, there would never be an empty chair at my table that wasn't filled with gratitude. My son tried to retire me too early. He thought my era had passed. Poor boy. He didn't know that women like me don't just fade away. We just simmer until the flavor is perfect. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. If it resonated with you, give it a like, comment on what touched you the most, and be sure to mention where you're from. Subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more stories to come.